over the president being away on official duty, also the vice president we know recovering in the UK, and also according to the NPP, as per their press conference, they say that the Speaker of Parliament is also away carrying out some duty. Are you as concerned about this power vacuum as is being described from a governance and international best practice perspective?
Well, thank you. It's a very interesting point raised by the opposition. And I think we have to look at this matter from two perspectives. Constitutionally, it can be a big deal. But in practical terms, it's really nothing. Constitutionally, I think those who are constitutionalists will agree that you have to go exactly by what the Constitution says. And in our Constitution, it's clear that in the absence of the president, the vice president naturally takes over. And in the absence of the vice president, the Speaker of Parliament steps in. In fact, it doesn't even prescribe Chief Justice stepping in when the Speaker of Parliament is not there. But I think if you look at the structure of government, you can just assume that that should be the order. And you see, if you look at the age-old tradition, why it's important for heads of states or presidents to someone to step in when they are out, and I think the framers of our Constitution follow that age-old tradition, bringing it down all the way to the Speaker. In that respect, one can argue that the Constitution says A, B, C, D. I don't see A, B, C, D. See, that's where the argument will be. And it seems to me the points raised by the opposition is what I call the constitutional issue. But I also said that practically it doesn't make sense because, as we all know today, information technology makes it easy for anyone, anywhere in the world.
That's right.
To have a chat, exactly, to have a chat, to give instructions home and all kinds of things. You see, for the U.S., for instance, their aircraft, U.S. Air Force One, is almost a traveling White House. Everything is on there. So Trump, wherever he is, can be directly fed with information. He can give instructions and all. In our case, we don't have our own Air Force One. But all the same, I believe that other technologies make it possible for our president to be in touch. So I think the argument is simple. If, in fact, we think that Ghana has come of age, and therefore we shouldn't be following this age-old tradition of a president, somebody taking over and swearing the speaker, as was introduced during the 2000s. I remember Speaker Alajete dressing up and taking the oath. At that time, all of us were kind of intrigued that this man is just power drunk because we never saw a speaker taking an oath to act in the absence of the president and the vice president. But since then, it has become the norm. Okay. So my position is simple. If in fact we agree that this age-old tradition is really out of date, I think we can do that. We can, and fortunately we have a Constitutional Review Committee. They can clarify that matter. So for me, it's simple. Constitutionally, there might be somebody to act in the absence of the president. And that is very clear. I think Article 60 or so, that clearly says it.
That's right.
But is it relevant today? I would say not necessarily.
And Prof, thank you for bringing up Article 60, Clause 11. I'll read the first few lines in particular, and also we can juxtapose that against what's happening now. And the clause says this: where the president and the vice president are both unable to perform the functions of the president, the Speaker of Parliament shall perform those functions until the president or the vice president is able to perform those functions. So where the article says where the president and vice president are both unable to perform, is it the case that simply by virtue of being outside of the jurisdiction, they are, as per the Constitution, unable to perform the functions? Is that what you're saying? We're reading too strictly and there should be some leeway given the levels of technology we now have at our disposal?
That's the point. Unable to perform means that practically you are not able to give instructions, give orders, supervise your government, on and on and on. And this constitution was written back in 1992. And in 1992, I don't know how old you were. There was nothing like iPhones and Zoom and all these kinds of new technologies that make it easy for people to communicate all over the world instantly. So the idea was that, sure, a president may travel, or president for health reasons may not be able to function. That, for me, was the motive for providing this. And truly, almost all constitutions may have that provision, because you don't know what happens to your leader and all. So because we do not want power vacuum in governance, that is the idea. Because in the olden days, when nations had to go to war and all, and have enemies around you, you didn't want to leave any moment where the commander-in-chief would be incapable of reaching his troops or giving directions and all. That is the rationale. So it's an old tradition in states or states. So I think that tradition has been carried on over the years, over the decades, only because in those years there was no technology for instant communication as we have it today. But now that we have all that, why don't we find a way to adapt to the new realities? So I think, personally, I would suggest that going forward, this could be an issue that can easily be addressed by the Constitutional Review Committee, especially for those who are constitutionalists and want to ensure that every action of government is in consonance with Constitution.
Prof, thank you so much for those thoughts. Do stick with me. I also want to introduce into the conversation Dr. Jonathan Asante Autry. He's a political analyst. Doc, hello, good morning.
Good morning, Alan.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, and you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for joining us on the program. The NPP describes this current situation as a power vacuum. How concerned are you? Are you also raising red flags about the absence of the president, the vice, and also the speaker?
Well, let me say good morning once again to you and to my co-panelists. I think that in this country, we dwell too much on the form instead of content or substance. And I think that either the president is here or is not here, with respect to what we are seeing now, I think we are dwelling too much on theory than in practice. And if I heard Prof quite rightly, then you should bear in mind that things of that nature, as humans as we are, they are possible. But when they do come, what do we do? The point also, too, is that the Constitution cannot envisage everything. That is why they say we have the spirit and then the letter of the Constitution. It cannot envisage everything. Other than that, it will be a very voluminous document that we may not be able to read, because human dynamism will create vacuums such as this. But as we split our heads over this, I think that there is no constitutional crisis. In actual fact, we may even have to distinguish between the state and government. Sometimes the government, functions as the state, but the state at some point in time is far distinct from government. So some time ago we had MPP government, they are no longer there, but the state still exists, and we have a new government. And so as long as state institutions and those at the helm of affairs are performing their assigned duties, the state is functioning, right? Either the judiciary or the legislature or the executive, they are all part, of the arms of government and state for that matter, and they are equally functioning. In terms of security, the CDRs, that of the immigration, the customs, you can talk about the police and so on and so forth. And so, it is much ado about nothing. I don't know why we should be spinning our heads over something that is not necessary. In actual fact, I've always been asking myself, a president that is not incapacitated, but has traveled outside the jurisdiction of the country, and is in one way or the other performing the functions of a president, does that mean that we do not have a president and we have a constitutional vacuum? In theory, in theory, he may not be here, but in practice, he still functions as the president. And so, if those who dwell much on form would want to suggest that, okay, when the president is absent, the vice president is the one to function in the absence of the president. In the absence of the vice president, the head of the legislature, that is the speaker, is the one that's supposed to perform that function. Okay, when he's also not there, it is the chief justice. So now the suggestion is that this particular chief justice has not been sworn in. The only difference, which is the qualifier, it is acting, but the denominator there is chief justice. Right. And therefore, whether you have an acting or substantive chief justice, or the substantive chief justice has been suspended, we have an acting chief justice, and nothing precludes that particular person from performing the functions of the president. And I also ask myself, what significant decision or action will the chief justice performing the function of the president take? It's nothing. It is just more theoretical, and it's just more form instead of substance. And so, as I said, once you have all these, apparatus, state functionaries performing their functions as it should be, I think that the state is functioning, and there is no vacuum.
Now, Doc, what do you say to those who are raising issues of, let's say, national security risks? So in times of crisis, for example, terror attacks, natural disaster, or some type of foreign aggression, if there's no clearly authorized individual to act with this presidential authority, could this cause a delay in decisive action and by extension, cause some harm to the people?
This is equally theoretical instead of practical. Because, as I said earlier on, the president is not incapacitated. Even as we have a vice president taking a rest or taking a health leave, we don't even have any information suggesting that the speaker, is also incapacitated. So, in practice, the president is still performing the functions of president, though outside this jurisdiction. And there is no way, as the scenario that you painted, the views of the president will not be sought before any decisive action will be taken. And so, in as much as in theory we may be worried, but I think that in practice, once you have all these state institutions having, stated functions and duties, I think that we are just splitting our heads over nothing.
Let me bring Prof back into the conversation. Prof, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
All right. So I'm reading here from the New Center newspaper, and these are some excerpts from the NPP's presser yesterday. And Mr. Darko, who is a legal counsel for the minority, also MP for Swami, he says that the minority will not allow such infractions to go unchallenged. I'm quoting him here. He says, "We will hold the president and his vice accountable to their oath of office, which demands fidelity to the Constitution. Where necessary, we shall invoke the relevant provisions of law to ensure that constitutional breaches do not go unpunished." Is this a storm in a teacup?
Look, you have to put this against the background of how our political parties behave when they are in opposition. I wouldn't have been surprised if it was the other way around and the opposition party making the same kinds of statements. And I think I agree with you, this is just a storm in a teacup, because I don't think anybody is going to impeach the president for what has happened. But frankly speaking, though, in as much as I insist that the president is not incapacitated in terms of communicating orders and commands and all whilst he's away, I think there's a reason why it is written in the Constitution. And this matter could have been addressed administratively without this fact that we have. So I think this is a matter normally the chief of staff of the president, who is the head of the government machinery, can routinely send a letter to the speaker announcing the absence of the two leaders of our country, in this case the president and the vice, to the speaker. Whether he did that or not, I'm not in a position to tell. Now, of course, then I also understand the speaker is not here. Perhaps that's what is causing the problem. Because this is simply, it's an administrative matter.
That's
and
right.
It shouldn't raise any errors. So that's why I began earlier in my remarks saying that, constitutionally, it's a big deal. Don't let us dismiss it, because the Constitution requires that this must be done. But in practical terms, it amounts to nothing. So if we are facing this situation, for me, it's simple. We can look at it. And my good friend also mentioned maybe if everything were to be put in the Constitution, then of course the Constitution would be 1,000 pages or 3,000 pages.
That's right.
So Constitution don't do that. But of course, when we are faced with this, normally the Supreme Court that can give some interpretation to guide governance. Okay, but in this case, I don't think it's even a matter of doing that. But I think we can address this constitutionally. Today, nobody would say that a president being out of the country is incommunicado with his commanders, as he's a commander-in-chief, with his chief of staff, with his ministers. No, it's not. Today is different from 1992, you see. So if that new reality has dawned on us, then again, we have to find a way to update it so that nobody can say that there's a constitutional vacuum because all the top 3 officers of our land are not in the country. I think for me, that's where the matter is. Okay.
And so, Prof, this is my final question to you from an administrative point of view. Should this moment then trigger a broader discussion about how Ghana coordinates executive travel and national leadership presence? And is there a governance model that you think we can emulate?
Very good point. Very good point, a question that you have raised. I think, you see, let's face it. If you are close to government, I'm not talking about Mahama's government, the governments of this fourth republic. If you have been close to them, you will discover so many lapses. At times, personally, I tell myself, hey, it's only God who is saving us. Because if you look at the ineptitudes in governance in this country, you'll be amazed that this country is intact, So there are serious lapses in the way we do our things, and we tend to take things also for granted in our country. So I think we need to address this. I keep saying that for me, it's not a big deal because, look, the president is functioning. The government is fully functional in the absence of the president. But I think we have to do things right. If the Constitution provides for that, it's a matter of the chief of staff taking care of it administratively. Now, in terms of the best model, what is the best model? It's clear. This is commonsensical. If your leader is not there, somebody asks for you. That has been the age-old tradition, not only for governments, but even for companies and all. Okay? If you are not there, somebody asks for you. So when it comes to the state level, it's even more crucial. And I think I made reference to history, why this was introduced. Now that history has passed. Okay? So the best model, I don't know. As I said earlier, Americans, the Air Force One is like a second White House, so they don't have a problem with that. But one thing I can say is that rationale is still there. In the U.S., for instance, the president and the vice president do not drive in the same car, they do not fly on the same flight. You know why? Because in case of accident, they don't want to lose the number one and number two. So normally, they don't travel together at all. And that rationale, I think, comes also from what we're discussing. Because if you don't want your president to be away, your vice to be away, and for the citizens not to know who is in charge of the country. You see, that is the rationale. So if we think technology has changed that rationale, then we need to also adapt and make it clear. Because I think it's the right of citizens to know that their leader is out, but there's somebody in charge. If the one in charge now is technology, well, then let's agree to that. And then there's no confusion over who is in charge. It's very important, I think.
Prof, thank you so much for your time this morning and sharing your thoughts with us on this matter.
Thank you.
Do have a wonderful Wednesday. Let me go back to Dr. Asante. And Doc, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. So you monitored the NPP's press conference. Would you say, how would you describe the posturing? Defensive, proactive, tone deaf?
Come again.
I'm asking about the NPP's presser, where they address this issue and a number of other issues. Are they simply being proactive in opposition, or was this a tone deaf approach?
Well, obviously we cannot think that the main opposition, we don't have to assume they are dead. It is just that their recent style of opposition appears to be measuring things that are minors, if you ask me. This particular constitutional issue that they are raising, probably for administrative purposes, as a nation, we may have to avert our minds to that. But as I said, it is more theoretical than practical. They also raised issues about Mr. Sami Gyamfi and asking him to be interdicted and then be investigated and all those things. Of course, it is quite understandable that Mr. Sami Gyamfi himself, has set a high standard in the public space in terms of politics. He has been a thorn in the flesh of the MPP, and so if something such as this has come into the public domain, then obviously they will want to have their pound of flesh. Other than that, it is more or less an exaggeration. I mean, it's an exaggeration of the whole issue. And so, as I said earlier on, they seem to be measuring things that, for me, are inconsequential in our daily politics. And even if they come to the fore, the kinds of things and conditions and preconditions and instructions, commands, requests, demands, and all those things, I think they are more or less like overkill. And that, for me, does not in any way tickle me in any way. And so they should tone down a bit because the unfortunate thing is that the current government and our leadership of President Mahama and that of the Vice President, they are not making, unpardonable mistakes, and they are not creating scandals. So it's creating some kind of discomfiture for the opposition. So it's like they will want to create something out of nothing. And that is the style of leadership we are seeing, like Mr. Finyamaki's style of leadership. Others who are national executives, they are braving themselves to see whether they will be re-elected, knowing very well that in a not too distant future, they will be voted heavily. They will vote heavily against them at the national level and probably at the regional levels. And so they are virtually jockeying for positions, for future positions, and, braving themselves up here and there to let them create some kind of goodwill in the minds of those who are here to become kingmakers in a not too distant future. So you can see and read in between the lines that these are the motives behind the bravado, the show of bravado in terms of the media space and the position that they are giving the current government.
Interesting perspective there, Doc. I'll take a final word then on this matter. How do we then proceed? You do acknowledge that there are some maybe administrative processes that we can look at, maybe in terms of the scheduling of official travel to ensure that all three heads are at least in their jurisdiction at some point. Is that something that you would champion?
Come again.
I was asking, you admit that there could be some administrative processes to look at given this current scenario. Would you be encouraging that there are some rules regarding some leadership presence so that we don't have all three leaders, President, Vice, and Speaker, out of the jurisdiction at the same time?
Well, it is not a bad idea. We can advocate for that. But You see, you cannot anticipate and envisage every human scenario. It is not possible. What if the three of them fall sick at the same time? And they will have to be, or they will have to be outside the country because they've all fallen ill. Would you have envisaged that? We don't have to create administrative absurdity. The Constitution did not envisage a situation where all the three, could be out, and then the only problem of the main opposition is the fact that the one who is performing the function of a chief justice is in an acting capacity. You see, and that for them is a constitutional vacuum. But I ask myself, all those CEOs that have been appointed and they are in an acting capacity, what function are they performing? They are performing the function of CEOs, and that is the common denominator. So I agree with you that in as much as we may not have anticipated something of that sort, it does not in any way prevent us, from looking in that direction from an administrative perspective. That's why I said that it could be more theoretical than practical, because
Absolutely.
in practice, the president is not incapacitated.
Doc, thank you so much for your time this morning and also lending your voice to this discussion. We truly appreciate it. Let's also speak now with Osman Al-Hassan. He's a private legal practitioner, no stranger to our 3FM Sunrise platform. Mr. Al-Hassan, good morning.
Good morning, and good morning to your listeners.
Hope you're doing well.
Great, by God's grace.
Thank you for joining us on the segment. We're talking about what the NPP describes as a power vacuum. The president is not around, neither is the vice. So we're told the speaker is also out of jurisdiction on some type of duty. Does that also raise some red flags with you from where you sit from a legal standpoint?
Well, red flags, I would say yes and no. They claim there's a power vacuum. Well, if you look at the current state of the law, the Constitution, and how it is interpreted by the Supreme Court, then we will say that there is a power vacuum. If indeed the president is out of the jurisdiction, and the speaker is out of the jurisdiction, and the vice president is also out of the jurisdiction. Given the current state of the law, the Constitution, and its interpretation by the Supreme Court, we would say that there is a power vacuum. But you see, the critics are not limiting themselves to the existence of a vacuum. They extend some sort of blame to the president. And that is where, for me, I think we should look at again and address it as a people. Now, if there is even a vacuum, given the absence of all these three people, the question is, who acts as the president? That is not an express provision in the Constitution. The Constitution is silent on who acts in the stead of the president if all these three heads of arms of government are absent. If the president is absent and the vice president is absent and the speaker is absent, the Constitution is silent as to who acts as the president and whether the persons will take the oath of the president or not is silent on it. So if we want to extend the existence of the vacuum as a blame on anyone, we might be making a mistake. Because what the president has to do when he's leaving the country is simply to notify the Speaker of Parliament. And as soon as he notifies the Speaker of Parliament about his travel or absence of the country, his constitutional obligation is done. The question is, who now takes the steps for the next person to act? Now, if the Speaker were around, according to the Supreme Court's interpretation, then it is the Speaker who will be sworn in. The swearing in is done by the Chief Justice. So the President has no role in the swearing in. And then we come to the question of who acts in the absence of the three.
Right.
Now we have the Supreme Court giving us an opinion, though I will admit that the opinion in Asare and Attorney General, which was about this kind of circumstance in 2003, 2004, was an arbitrary opinion given by Uche. He said, and if it becomes necessary, if all the three are absent or unable to perform their functions or the functions of a president, then of course the Chief Justice should be sworn in. And he takes from the interpretation he gave to Article 57, Clause 2, which give us precedence or preferences of people, or the people who take precedence over all other people in Ghana in ascending order, starting from the president, the vice president, the speaker, and then the Chief Justice.
Now,
Hello?
yes, I'm still with you here. Now,
Yes, so the Chief Justice is not expressly stated in the Constitution that in the absence of the Speaker, then the Chief Justice should be sworn in. But this is an orbital opinion that was given by one of the Supreme Court judges, Justice Kluje, in one of the cases in such a circumstance.
right.
So the red flag, I wouldn't say red flag because there is also another slant. You see, there's a difference between Article 60, Clause 8 and Article 60, Clause 11. But for me and to other people, there are so many other people who even disagree with the Supreme Court decision or interpretation that once the president is absent from the jurisdiction, then he's incapable of performing his functions as a president. Because the condition or the condition precedent for the vice president to take the place of the president is if he is unable to perform his function for any reason or he is absent from the jurisdiction. But when it comes to Clause 11, it talks only about the inability to perform the functions. That is where the speaker comes in. Now, the inability to perform the functions was now what the Supreme Court interprets in Asare and Attorney General. And what were they saying? The question was whether absence from the jurisdiction was to be interpreted or was to mean that the president was incapable of performing his functions. And many people disagree with the Supreme Court decision when it comes to the conclusion that, if the president is absent, then he's unable to perform his function. Why do they disagree? They disagree because of the technology we have today.
That's right.
We are in the fiber optic age. We can do several things virtually. And so if the president is out of the jurisdiction, does that mean that he cannot perform his function using the technologies that we have today? And so it makes that decision really not sound to many people. And I can say I'm one of them, because you can't say the president cannot perform his functions as a president if he's out of the jurisdiction. And secondly, if someone is sworn in to act as a president, the president being out of the jurisdiction, what is he? Is he still the president? And can he represent the country and perform the duties of a president outside the country? Those are the things that the problems that we have with the Supreme Court judgment. But of course, our opinions and our views is not the law. It's the view of the Supreme Court that is the law. So until that is changed, that is the position of the law, that when the president is absent, then he's incapable of performing his functions as a president. And so the speaker must be sworn in. But here, the speaker is absent. Should the Chief Justice be sworn in? Or should the deputy speaker be sworn in? That the Constitution is silent, because we have two deputies to the speaker.
That's right.
And that makes that makes the Chief Justice really at the last end. It has a long chain to get to the Chief Justice. So the question is, in the absence of the speaker, should the first deputy speaker be sworn in? Should the chief justice be sworn in? That the constitution is silent. But so for me, I think it's not a red flag per se,
Right.
but it is something we need the Supreme Court. We need to give the Supreme Court an opportunity to give a definite interpretation. And you see, I think Parliament should start taking advantage of its powers under Article 298, where the Constitution clearly says that in where the Constitution is silent or where the Constitution has not provided expressly for any matter, then Parliament shall by law make provision for it. You see? And so I think Parliament should take advantage of Article 298 and make laws that govern some of these things,
Right.
these lacunas that exist in the Constitution. So to answer your question, I don't see it as a red flag. That's my personal opinion. But I think it is something, it is a controversy that needs to be resolved by the Supreme Court.
And then I'll ask my final question, Osman. From a purely legal standpoint, does this situation amount to a crisis? I think you've already maybe answered that, but or would you say it's more of a political controversy dressed in legal language?
Well, it is a controversy that you will arrive at by reading the law, reading the constitutional provisions, and reading the interpretation by the Supreme Court. It is a controversy. And the controversy is manifested by the fact that different people have different views about what should happen now. You see? And that's why I'm saying that controversy, I won't call it a crisis, a constitutional crisis. I mean, crisis is too heavy a word for me to ascribe to it. That's my personal opinion. But I think it is a controversy that need be resolved going forward. And I don't think anybody is to blame for the situation. And if anybody is even to blame, then we should be talking about the acting Chief Justice and the Deputy Speaker, the first Deputy Speaker who are left. Because the swearing in as the person to act in the absence of the President and all these people is done by the Chief Justice. So the question is, why is the Chief Justice not swearing in the first Deputy Speaker? And so for me, to the person who is most far remote from this issue or from any blame for this situation is the President, because the President, as soon as we find that he duly notified the Speaker of his absence, his duty is done.
Right.
Yes.
Osman Al-Hassan, thank you so much for your thoughts on this particular issue. Of course, it's unfolding, and I'm sure we'll be able to pick your perspectives as and when the matter evolves. Do have a wonderful, wonderful Wednesday.
Thank you very much, and same to you.
Osman Al-Hassan is a private legal practitioner talking to us about this issue of whether or not we have a power vacuum. We also spoke with Dr. Jonathan Asante Otre, political analyst, also with Professor Bafo Ajimendua. He's a former senior governance advisor. Well, this conversation has shown us once again that democracy isn't just about elections. It's about responsibility, vigilance, and it's the little details that keep a nation functioning. Do keep your thoughts coming on our socials. This is still the best breakfast show in all of the land. This is still 3FM Sunrise on 3FM 92.7.